Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I will be talking about White Sands by Brandon Sanderson. And White Sands was adapted into a graphic novel, and it was also later adapted into a audio experience, I think is how they described it. And I just want to be real upfront that I read this through the audio format. I wasn't able to get a physical edition of the collection for this, and I didn't want to buy it. It was kind of expensive. I couldn't get it from my library, so I did end up just listening to the audio version of this. So I think that might influence this review a little bit more than normally an audiobook would, because this is definitely a visual medium. I did look in the collection Arcadium Unbound, which does have some of the panels from White Sand. So I did see that, and I did look up a few other things about the graphic novel, and I think an omnibus is also coming out. So I just wanted to be mention that up front, because this is going to be based off the audio that I consumed. So what is White Sands about? Well, this takes place on a planet. I'm going to go with Taldaean, is I believe how you say it. And this planet has a light side and a dark side. The way it revolves around its sun is there's always one side of the planet that is really lit by sun, and a dark side of the planet that is missing that. And we follow Kenton, and also, and he's on the light side, he's a sandmaster, and we really kind of follow mostly his experience through trying to basically save his magical race of sandmasters. He has the ability to control sand on dayside. And this isn't a spoiler, this happens very, very early on, but basically most of his, group of these sandmasters are killed in an ambush attack. And we really kind of follow Kenton's journey to, preserve what I'm going to call his culture, his existence, his life. That is the biggest thing we follow. We also follow somebody from Darkside, Chrysalia, that's pretty close. And, she is looking for somebody on her way from Darkside to Lightside. And, that is the basic premise as we go through trying to achieve those goals. This was broken up into 3 volumes when I read it, I gave all 3 of them 3 stars. I thought they were pretty decent overall. I definitely have some thoughts, and I'm still would kind of like to go back and at some point read this in the visual novel that it's kind of meant to be in. I think that would definitely affect the way I look at this story. I think a lot of the magic that happens is very visual, and getting it through audio, I think the audio still did a really good job, but you're definitely missing out on some of the elaborateness of the world and the way the magic is used. The sand just seems like it would flow very well. But with all that mentioned, I'm going to mention what I like, what I didn't like, and then I'll kind of have an overview at the end. So my first really strong like is the world. I thought the world was super interesting. The idea of there really being 2 separate worlds on one planet, one from the light side and one from the dark side. Super interesting, super fascinating. And while 99% of this story takes place on the light side, which is just basically a giant desert, it made me really interested in the planet itself. That was cool. It really made me want to continue reading Dune. So I've only read Dune, and I've been planning on reading Dune Messiah and the subsequent Golden Road or Golden Path for a really long time. But as I was reading this, I really had missed like this desert kind of environment and how creative it is. Sanderson always does such a good job of building unique worlds and just really supplanting you in that space, and just having normally creatures and things that just work really well in that unique setting. And that is one thing I have always praised Sanderson for, is a lot of his worlds do feel unique, and there's not too much overlap between certain things. There is a little bit in this actually between it and Stormlight that I made some connections to that they kind of are similar yet different. So that was interesting. But yeah, the world, I do wish we got to spend more time on the dark side, because I do think some more interesting things were probably happening over there. But in general, the world was really cool, and I would love to get to explore more. I kind of hinted on there, but that separation between the light side and the dark side was really interesting. The different cultures that definitely happen and spawn because of this are really interesting and not explored enough, but it was still a positive. It really made me kind of just use my own imagination and think about what differences would be going on. When we do see Darksiders coming over to the light side, just the sun, bothers their eyes so much that they're wearing glasses, and they just can't believe that this is what people deal with. And also with how hot it is and everything. And it just made it feel very, like I could experience that. I do live in a very warm climate, but even then when I did take trips out to the West Coast, or really Nevada, I went to Vegas and experienced that desert heat. It's such a different thing than where I am currently that I don't know, I could just really kind of relate to some of the things that some of the characters were going through. And it wouldn't be something created by Brandon Sanderson if we didn't mention the magic system. I already kind of did, but the way the sand works is that the stronger the user is, the more sand ribbons they can use at a time. And so seeing that, very clear power scaling and structure was really cool. And just the different things that Kenton, who is not very strong in sand mastery, was able to come up with and different solutions to the problem. It made me feel like he was playing like one of those engineering games, like a Polybridge or something, where there's a lot of different solutions. And if you have all these resources, unlimited resources, there's probably one way you would do it. But when you're trying to, come up with the cheapest solution or the most different solution, it really shows the variety that can happen in what seems to be such a rigid magic structure. And so once again, Sanderson knocks it out of the park with the magic system, and the consequences for the magic system in this were really cool as well. It makes sense that, in a desert climate, they have this magic that's attributed to sand. But the cool thing is the drawback from it is if they use too much of this power, they get very dehydrated to the point where they can accidentally, cause themselves to be so dehydrated that they die. And I just thought that was really cool because a lot of magic systems, there's not always that give and take. A lot of it is just, I have this much power, I can do this much stuff. And so to have a real negative drawback in a world where water is obviously not the most abundant resource is a really cool thing to see explored. And now to move on to my dislikes. I just spent some time talking about what I liked about Kenton, the main character, but it was really just all about his magic system. I didn't really find his story, the way it was done, very compelling. The action that leads to his story, I think could have, done a whole number of different things. But what really happens is he just kind of gets put on these side quests on getting people to be on his side. And it just wasn't that interesting. And I really wish we actually followed and spent more time on Darkseid with Corsalia. I really think that if we had spent more time there, because it seemed like there was a lot more deep political, governments fighting each other, just warring nations, that I think is a much more interesting setting to be in. I would have loved to have spent more time there before she leaves and comes to Lightside to try and fix her situation on Darkseid. And so I think she was a much more compelling character with a much more interesting arc that could have been told than Kenton was. I think just the way Kenton's story went just wasn't all that interesting, even though he is really trying to preserve his culture. And I'm using that very directly because the way the Sandmasters have built up their world is just, a part of them. And I don't know, the way it went about just wasn't that interesting. And the stuff on Darkseid just seemed way more fascinating with, what you would normally see in a more traditional epic fantasy, which is hard to call this epic fantasy because it is very self-contained, and because of the medium it's in, you don't get a lot of that elaborative stuff that you would expect from like a Stormlight Archive or Wheel of Time, that kind of epicness. It's just not here. And I know this is a standalone, but even something like Warbreaker that is also by Sanderson, I just felt it was built out a whole lot more. This is an interesting complaint, and I kind of mentioned it, but the plot itself, it moves very, very quickly. It seems like anytime a real obstacle is provided to Kenton, he is able to just kind of make it happen. The struggle that for his task really should be insurmountable, and it ends up not being. I mean, while it is difficult, I don't know, it just kind of seemed like, I don't want to call it plot conveniences because that's not what it is either, but it is really just, it just happens. He does a decent job of, coming up with what his plan is and how he's going to achieve these things, and really, having change happen in the society that wasn't, being the Sandmasters. Let me rephrase that. The Sandmasters, were a part of the society. They were really just a parasite. They were just taking and not giving. And Kenton does come up with a good plan of action to make amends for a lot of the things that they were doing. But a lot of it just seems like, I don't know, it just didn't work. It was very fast. It just happened. People accepted things without there really being any reason for them to accept it other than the word of Kenton, which, I mean, I guess at this point, it was as good as anything else that they had, but it just seemed like the little bit of scheming that did happen just wasn't enough. And it just wasn't all that great. So overall, this is a series that I think I might want to re-experience in the graphical form. I've mentioned that already, but I really do think that that could make a different impact. I did watch one review from Just Another BookTube channel, I think is his title. I'll make sure to have him in the description, where he went over some of his issues he had in the graphic novel itself. And so I looked into that, and I definitely see his criticisms. I was into comic books for a little bit, and I can see why he didn't like some of those things. But I did also read that apparently the omnibus edition that is coming out, or is out, I'm not 100% sure, fixes a lot of those issues. So I'm kind of interested to see there. But overall, I think this is a decent story. I don't know if I would really recommend it to most people unless you are a Cosmere completionist like I am. I am trying to read it all this year, and while I didn't hate my time with this, I didn't love it either. I mean, it was fine. It was a cool world, cool magic, but a lot of the stuff in the middle just, it was fine. I've read much better, I've read much worse. And it is apparently this is Sanderson's first work and story he ever truly finished, and it never was published in a traditional way, and some of that is definitely in there. But I also think that some of that is probably aided in the physical graphic novel sense. So I'm really curious on, if I went back and read it, if I would really change my opinion on it. I don't think I really would, but that's just kind of my overall thoughts on it. It's fine, but probably don't waste your time on it unless you want to read all of the Cosmere like me. But that is all for me on White Sands by Brandon Sanderson. Let me know any of your thoughts about this if you've read it down in the comments below. And as always, I hope you have a good one.